Welcome to AminAcademy.com. In world history, let us discuss about ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt serves an excellent example of complex society with cross-cultural connections, adoption to and control over changing environments, and sophisticated political and religious developments. All of these themes are evident in an examination of the origin of Egypt. Egyptian leaders unified Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE, creating a powerful ancient state developing in the millennia preceding unification, including the sharing of innovation and responses to environmental change, set the stage for the emergence of the Egyptian civilization. Cross-cultural connection introduced in people Northeast Africa to domesticated wheat and barley, two of the crops that they grew and whose surplus supported the process of social differentiation in eventually the pharaonic elite and skilled classes of ancient Egypt. People in Northeast Africa had likely been gathering wild barley since before 10,000 years BCE. However, sharing in the knowledge spreading from the Fertile Crescent around 7000 BCE, they began cultivating wheat and barley and also keeping domesticated animals, including sheep and goats. At the time, agricultural production and herding were possible in areas that are today part of the Sahara Desert. The period was much wetter than now. People in the region settled into small communities, and archaeological evidence of hearths, grinding stones, and storage silos shows the growth of settlement in areas that today are not well watered enough for agricultural production. It is in year 2490 BC, wooden boats cruised along the Nile River in Egypt as thousands of workers stacked giant stone blocks into a pyramid. These 200-foot tall structures honors a pharaoh named Menkaure. This pharaoh fathers Khafre ordered construction of 450-foot high pyramid nearby, and his grandfather Khufu built the Great Pyramid at Giza, the largest of the three at about 480 feet. Covered in polished white limestone, the pyramid seems to glow in sunlight. Egyptians working on the pyramids are helping create a cultural that will last more than 3000 years. It will be one of the longest lasting civilization in the world. During the time, ancient Egyptians created works of art and engineering that still amaze us today. History of ancient Egypt. People settled in Egypt as early as 6000 BC. Over time, small villages joined together to become states until two kingdoms emerged. Lower Egypt, which covers the Nile River Delta up to the Mediterranean Sea in the north, and Upper Egypt, which covers the Nile Valley in the south. The Nile River flows from south to north. So for the ancient Egyptians, the southern part of the country was up. Around 3100 BC, a king, later called Pharaoh, united these two lands to be one country, and so historians begin the long history of ancient Egypt here, dividing it into different periods. They don't always know the exact date of historical events, so that's why you all see a next to some of the years. It stands for circa, meaning around. The Nile River flow, the Nile River flow south to north, fed by two main river systems, the White Nile and the Blue Nile. The White Nile flows steadily throughout the year and has its origin in the Great Lakes region of East Africa. The Blue Nile originates in the Ethiopian highlands and brings flood waters up past the first cataract in the summers. The first cataract lies roughly at Aswan on the map. The River Nile, the longest river in the world, called the father of African rivers, it rises south the equator and flows northward through the northwestern Africa to drain into the Mediterranean Sea. It has a length of about 4,132 miles, around 6,650 kilometers, and drains an area estimated 12 lakhs 93,000 square miles, around 33 lakhs 49,000 square kilometers. That much vast area it cultivates. Its basin include parts of Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, and Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Sudan, and the cultivated part of Egypt. Its most distant source is the Kagera River in Burundi. The Nile is an important not just to Egypt but no surrounding countries: Burundi, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Sudan have spoken out against Egyptian domination of the Nile's water for development. In the early to mid 1900s, two agreements were signed to give Egypt and Sudan extensively right over the river's use. Upstream countries such as Kenya and Uganda have argued that the treaties gave Egypt unfair control. In the late 1990s, the Nile Basin Initiative went underway. The 10 countries which share the Nile met to find a way to cooperate to use the Nile sustainably and effectively towards the development. Next one, Pellet of Narmer. What is that? The Narmer Pellet, also known as Narmer's Victory Pellet and the Great Hierarchopolis Pellet, is an Egyptian ceremonial engraving a little over 2 feet, that is 64 centimeter, tall and shaped like a chevron shield, depicting the first dynasty king Narmer conquering his enemies and uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. It features some of the earliest hieroglyphics found in Egypt and dates to 3200 to 3000 BCE. The palace is carved of a single piece of silestone, commonly used for ceremonial tablets in the first dynastic period of Egypt. The fact that the palette is carved on both sides means that it was created for ceremonial instead of practical purpose. Palettes which were made for daily use were only decorated on one side. The Narmer palette is intricately carved to tell the story of King Narmer's victory in battle and the approval of the gods at the unification of Egypt. Next, we will talk about Dynasty of Egypt. Dynastic Egypt. The ancient Egyptian history, dynasties are series of rulers sharing a common origin They are usually, but no always, traditionally divided into 33 pharaonic dynasties. These dynasties are commonly grouped by modern scholars into kingdoms and intermediate periods. The first 30 divisions come from 3rd century BC. Egyptian priests Moneto, whose the names of the last two, the short-lived Persian ruled 31st dynasty and the longer-lasting Ptolemaic dynasty are later coinings. Further detail we'll do now. Scholars break the 1500 years following unification, a time known as dynastic Egypt, into three main periods: Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom. There is some disagreement about the exact dates of the periods, but in general, these spans denote more centralized control over a unified Egypt. Social distinctions and hierarchies remain fairly consistent through all of the dynastic Egypt. Most people were rural peasant farmers. They lived in small mud huts just above the floodplain and turned over surplus agricultural produce to the state as taxes. When they were not farming, they were expected to perform rotating service for the state by, for example, working on a pharaoh's tomb, reinforcing dikes, and helping in the construction of temples. The labor of majority of the population supported the more elite and skilled classes, from the pharaoh down through the governing bureaucracies, priests, nobles, soldiers, and skilled craftspeople, especially those who worked on pyramids and tombs. Another continuity in dynastic Egypt was the relative equality of women to men. At least compared to women in other ancient societies, women in ancient Egypt had considerably legal rights and freedoms. Men and women did generally have different roles. Egyptian society changed men and providing for the family and women with managing the home and children. Societies ascribed gender roles mean that women were usually defined primarily by their husbands and children, while men were defined by their occupations. This difference could leave women more economically vulnerable than men. For example, in the village of craft people who worked on the pharaoh's tomb at Deir el Medina, houses were allocated to the men who were actively employed. This system of assigning housing meant that women whose husbands had died would be kicked out of their homes as replacement workers were brought in. Despite some vulnerability, Egyptian law was pretty equal between the sexes when it came to many other issues. Egyptian women could own property, and tax record shows that they did. Egyptian women could also take cases to court, enter into legally binding agreement, and serve actively as priestesses. There were also female pharaohs, famously Hatshepsut, who ruled for 20 years in the 15th century BCE. One last pharaoh's surprising legal entitlement of ancient Egyptian women was their right to one-third of the property that a couple accumulated over the course of their marriage. Married women had some financial independence, which gave them option to dispose of their own property or divorce. Therefore, while women did face constraints in terms of their expected roles and had their states status tied to the men in their families. They nevertheless enjoyed economic freedoms and legal rights not commonly seen in the ancient world. So far, we discussed about ancient Egypt, dynasty of Egypt, and around in world history, we talked about ancient Egypt little bit. We have done. Please subscribe our YouTube channel.